Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Wesley, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, man. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Hello, I'm Dr. Wesley Britton, and I'm the author of 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 books now. A bunch of them are my sci-fi Beta Earth Chronicles series. 4 of them are pretty much what we're doing this interview here today. They're on spies, on spy TV, film, books, you name it. I have a radio show called Flashback that airs on ksav.org every Monday at 7 o'clock East and West, as the station owner says. And I interview celebrities and authors that talk about entertainment of the past. And that could be musicians, actors, blah, blah, blah. And most of those shows end up at my Remember When podcast page. So there's the Whirlwind Tour.
All right,
What else do you want to know?
How's it going? But let's talk about your spy books. How'd you get interested in spies?
I'm a baby boomer. Back in the 60s, I guess it all goes back to bubblegum cards. I was really a young kid when The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and all that stuff was coming out. And my mom had gone up to New York for a welcome wagon conference or something. So there was a teenager from the church. She had babysit me for that week. And we walked down to a little local convenience store, and they had bubblegum cards for The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And I got fascinated by them. I ended up with all 66 Man from U.N.C.L.E. bubblegum cards before I ever saw an episode. And then I watched The Man from U.N.C.L.E. religiously until the end, and The Avengers, and The Saint, and The Prisoner, and all of them. I was just lost in it. And I saw a good number of the movies that were back in the day. Man, oh man, they were everywhere. You couldn't miss it. Plus, they had toys everywhere, guns and puzzles and badges, and you name it. And I collected it all, and it was kind of a 60s thing for me. And of course, things slowed down thereafter. But I kept up with stuff because I got into reading the novels. I read a lot of spy novels, still do. Lynn Dane, John le Carré back in those days, and Tom Clancy and Clive Cussler and others ever since. And, kept up with the movies, some of them good, some of them, I don't get done without that one. But there's this always never ending interest in spies. When I started writing books, one big joy for me was going back in history long before the 50s. Well, the spy boom doesn't really kick in until Dr. No, although there were some things. Well, I went back all the way at the beginning of the 20th century, because that's when Spy 5 begins. That's when we start to see secret agents of all different kinds, mostly in England. That was a real joy kind of going through history because I love history. And
So you try and take real accounts of spies as well, too. I got interested in like more of the 70s era when Watergate kind of happens and around the church committee's time, I think is when we get a clear example of what like the CIA and FBI was up to. But before that was the OSS. I mean, I've seen plenty of movies with like MI5 in it, but I haven't really seen any. I don't even know if James Bond is CIA or not. I don't think I've ever really sat through a full James Bond
no,
film.
no. He's MI6. He's British.
Yeah. So we don't have a whole lot of films about like our intelligence agencies, at least that I know of, at least popular culture films.
Well, we do nowadays. The NSA too, like Enemy of the State, which I think is one of the best ones. Spy Games, another really good one for the CIA.
I know Spy Kids. I don't know Spy Games.
Well, Spy Kids, I don't pay attention to. Spy Games is a classic. Oh, that's just wonderful. I have to look through my notes because I've got at my website, by the way, folks, if you want to know about spies, check out spywisesecretdossier.com. spywisesecretdossier.com. And it is like 4 or 5 books, really. one whole section on spies in history, one whole section on spies in film, and one whole section on spies in history and literature, and one whole section on the James Bond files. And it's a perfect time to be talking about James Bond because there's all these anniversaries in terms of films about the CIA and all that. Oh, you're talking about the 70s. The thing about the 70s is you talk about the church community and all that. That was kind of the era when Jigsaw Man came out. And then, oh, what was the one with the dentist chair in it? Um, Football player, Dustin Hoffman. Can't think of the name of the movie off the top of my head. But those were the days when all of a sudden it really was a blossoming theme that you have your hero. Who are the good guys? Oftentimes, it's not very clear. Is it the Russians or is it us? Or is it both? And trying to figure out just exactly who is the evil side of this paradigm is a big thing that comes in the 70s as a big result of the Watergate hearings and the church committee and all of that kind of stuff is, yeah, well, we're just about as nefarious as the Russians are. We can't exactly get on the high moral crusade here because we do some pretty nasty stuff ourselves. And that was a big thing happening in the 70s, or that was a big, big thing. Cynicism.
Well, let me ask your personal experience about like being a fan of spies since you were a kid, and then kind of what your thoughts were about them before all the church committee stuff, and then what are your thoughts after if they changed? I mean, I think when everybody as a kid wants to be a super secret agent, I think the Men in Black first got me interested into when I was a kid, when I first saw them, being like, oh my God, this would be cool to be like, be able to wipe people's memory and be able to do all these spy tactic stuffs. And after actually diving into the history, and kind of going into reading the whole church committee report, hearing examples from people that like Vern Lyon, who wrote a book called Eyes on Havana about his time on college campuses working for the CIA. When I hear people's stories of it, they don't necessarily sound very good. And it kind of deterred me from the whole CIA thing, the accountability aspect. And then this word that gets thrown around, especially the JFK stuff, national security. I'm like, well, what does that mean? And it's like an open door policy. Anything that they want to label national security, they can do that.
Classify it. That's all those classified documents. Well, that's just it. The spy game in all of its areas is so many different things. One of the great spy novels of them all is A Shendon by W. Somerset Maugham. And his basic thesis is it's such a waste of time. We spend a lot of time shuffling paper and sending all this stuff, and it accomplishes nothing. And there's a lot of books out there that, delve into that, how much time is being wasted. Um, Other times when they do get into who's the evil stuff. Well, and nobody in their right mind thinks of the James Bond or Napoleon Solo or any of those guys are anywhere near reality. It's obviously escapism, I would think, especially when you get into the Roger Moore era. I mean, that's,
It's propaganda. It's propaganda.
to a point, because bearing in mind that 90% of the adversaries that 007 takes on, they're not political. In fact, they went to great pains to avoid too many political connections. We have all these nefarious evildoers and diabolical mad scientists wanting to rule the world and all that. And
They always have a metal eye or metal mouth as well too.
something,
Yeah.
some kind of distinguishing handicap, disability, something.
Which is weird because in superhero like films, you see the bald guy's usually the bad guy, and then now in this one, it's like everybody in a slick suit or like blazer or tracksuit. Sometimes if they have like a really nice tracksuit, you're like, okay, that guy's probably gonna do some mafia or some bad stuff.
Well, I have to admit, I haven't kept track of those. So, of course, I think of ball guys. I think of Patrick Stewart, of course, and the X Men.
Lex Luthor.
Yeah, well, you got Lex Luthor on the other side.
They're all evil people, always bald people. Every time I see a movie, they always have a big biker dude who's bald, or he has like a really long flowing mane like Fabio. But we don't have to get into all that. But when it comes to like the spies, like I mentioned, when the Watergate and the church stuff came out, I mean, did your perspective change on spies at all? I mean, besides analyzing it from the films, I mean, being a kid, you have to at one point, and it feels like everybody I talk to or everyone I've seen through documentation turns out to be like an FBI informant or CIA something when it comes to back in the day. Like, was the CIA hiring just random people off the street? But nope, they just, I guess they were more open about it then, or if you're a low level or something like that. So I figured if you're a kid growing up around that stuff, you had to be interested in trying to join at one point, and then
Well, I was until I read a pamphlet in the school library on how to join the FBI. And the big message in the pamphlet was get a degree in accounting. As soon as I read that, I went, never mind. Math and me do not get along, never have. Accounting, that kind of set the stage for, well, I can kind of see what real life is like here. So I figured, well, why don't I write about spies instead?
now, when we talk about spy history, can you take me through a little bit of spy history? Like, when did it start? Like, do you go as far back as the OSS, or do you go to more like the other foreign intelligence offices?
Well, okay, now you're talking about modern espionage because if you're looking at the history of spies, you go back to the Bible and before.
The Bible.
Oh my heavens, yes. The two spies that went into Canaan there, and what was her name? Rachel, who hung the stuff out so that the spies could find their way out and all that. Oh yeah. Um, during the conquest of Canaan. Oh my, yeah, we've got spies everywhere all the time. Um, Reformation, But in terms of modern espionage, I kind of started picking up at the beginning of the 20th century because that's when spy literature really began. There were spy books before that, but they were very occasional, like James Fenimore Cooper's The Spy. And that's about it, really. And then all of a sudden, it was World War One that kind of kicked it wide open. And all of a sudden, at the same time, really, we started getting all the movies about spies. Those days, of course, there were the silent movies. And then, the books of the Clubland writers, John Buchan and Sapphire, and the Bulldog Drummond stories, and all of that started coming out. In those days, spies were dashing British sports heroes. Well, not sports heroes, but they were called Clubland writers because they lived and worked a lot in sports clubs, and they had their money. They were gentlemen. They could go out and get into adventures, and they were just on their own. They didn't really work for any particular agency. They just got caught up in stuff. Well, one of the fun things about the Bulldog film series, if you ever get a chance to check those out, is that every week, or not every week, but every episode, Bulldog is just drawn into something to the point it drives his fiance crazy. In one movie, she hides all his clothes so that he can get to his wedding and not get drawn away in some adventure. But of course, that doesn't work. That's Bulldog Jump in Africa. That's fun. There are a lot of those movies that were just plain fun. But at the same time, because it was the beginning of the 20th century, there was a big interest in technology, especially with the brewing of World War One that most people knew was coming. For about a decade, there was a big move not to make those kinds of movies because a lot of people thought they were propaganda for war profiteers. With all this drumbeat for war was all about merchants of death making their money, and don't want to do that kind of propaganda. Then it flipped. Then we were in the war, and everything was different. All of a sudden, if you looked at all those movies, everybody from little girls, especially women, because a lot of those old early movies were made specifically for women from Nickelodeons. They were silent. They were about 10 minutes long. You go down to the local Nickelodeon, put in your nickel or whatever it was, and watch the latest heroine defeat a nest of German spies. Man, there were German spies everywhere. And that's kind of what it really started. There were plenty of dashing young men, especially when aeroplanes. People got really big into aeroplanes and submarines and new bombs and new explosives. And that's where Spy 5 begins, is they're looking for all these new weapons to battle the Germans with. Or the Mexicans. I was really startled the other day to relearn as a chapter in a third book, On Screen and Undercover, about at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a whole genre of movies anti-Mexican.
Really?
and they had the same statements about immigrants then as they do now, about them taking jobs, about them smuggling drugs and everything. I just sit back with, holy Hannah, I'd forgotten about this. There was a whole lot of them. And a big reason for that was back in those days, when you go to film movies, Hollywood was just beginning, but the desert and the Western settings were right there. They could go out there and do all their filming. And that's another big reason why Westerns became so popular. They were easy to film, not like on having to build sets for Germany or Zurich or the rest of the globe. That was a big genre. I didn't realize that. Yeah, and the airplanes and the submarines and all of that. And World War One came, and there was a big difference between British sensibilities and American. Because America, we have this snootiness. We don't do dirty stuff. Herbert Simpson, who was Herbert Hoover's Secretary of War or Labor, something like that, say, gentlemen, don't read each other's mail. So after the war, they closed down all of their very effective spy operations that they had, the Black Chamber, code breakers in particular. So it wasn't until the OSS, and that was a European based thing, until World War II, that America got started. Whoa, we need to have a spy agency. We need to have some professional spies. And in between, it was all amateurs. And I'm not talking too much here.
No, that was good because what I wanted to know is about Mexico. I mean, I never heard of them going after Mexico like that or doing any propaganda against Mexico. I would have thought it would have been the Russians or something. But I mean, you mentioned, I mean,
Oh, not then. No, the Russians were not big yet. They were just, oh, hell, the revolution wasn't until what, 1917, something like that.
the one I'm more familiar with is like I know there's a lot of propaganda, especially every time it's a spy or even movies today. Captain America is a good example, but it all bases on like the Nazis going against the Nazis are always like an okay villain to go against. But like I think it would be a little bit more controversial, even if you brought up Russians today. There'd be people that be like, hey, you know what? What are we doing? We're even despite all the stuff going on right now, there's just a different pull to it. But Nazis are like a safe bet as a bad guy. You can just always choose the
Well, then
Nazi.
the Huns in World War One, they weren't Nazis. They were just, the Kaiser's Huns. So yeah, they were the safe bad guys. And yeah, World War II, and then the Cold War kicks in. Yeah, then it's the Russians, and every once in a while the Chinese. But mostly through most of the spy films and spy books and all that, it's the independent rich guy who wants to, take over the world in one way or another. The Blofelds and the Bond films and Mission Impossible. Most of the time, they're not really. Well, they deal with small governments who get kind of small aims as compared to the big Cold War um, map. But it changes. Who we are and what we want changes. It's like Tom Clancy was talking about right after 9/11, that most Americans just don't want to accept the messiness of the spy business. We've got to do nasty, nefarious, ugly, muddy things if we're going to battle the people who are busy in nasty, ugly, nefarious things, especially the Middle East, because when this, 9/11 happened, and even before that, Middle Easterners were big adversaries. So a lot of effort was put into books and movies where we deal with Syrians and especially Syrians, Egyptians, you name it, Iraqis. They became the go-to villains for a long, long time. But if you want to get that, you got to have undercover operatives, and undercover operatives got to be able to do nasty things. And you just got to accept the fact that, well, it is kind of national security. It is kind of human security in some cases if you want to take out these guys. It can't be a nice, clean arrest or negotiation.
Well,
It's nasty stuff.
this might be where we might disagree, but you don't think that the CIA or the FBI or any of the intelligence operations, you don't think any of them should probably have more accountability or transparency when it comes to some of these actions that they do? I mean, even the church committee exposed that they were activating domestically. I mean, there's a really ghostly video you can probably see up on YouTube of AP Archive is Hale Boggs. Um, House Select Committee, is it House Un-American Select Committee, and he's talking in 71 about Hoover and asking for him to resign. Now, if you know anything about Hoover, you don't do that. But he said Hoover's wiretapping congressmen, and the reporter literally goes, "What's your evidence on that?" And he goes, "It'll all come out, soon. We're doing an investigation on it." He goes, "Well, why is it taking so long?" And he goes, "Well, you're asking the FBI to investigate the FBI. Like, it's not an easy thing to do." And then 72, Boggs' plane goes down over Alaska, but 74, all that stuff he was saying about Hoover came out after Hoover died. So it's like, I mean, do you think there's a fine line? Like, I'm okay with, you know, people being willing participants, you know what I mean? And things that obviously, when it comes to, if you accept the risk of being a spy, if you get caught, the CIA has to do this plausible deniability and let you go a little bit, kind of you're on your own mentality. But not, they don't always let people know those types of things. I mean, MK Ultra is real, and that was on Unwitting Americans, and that's in the Church Committee report as well too. So it's like, where do we draw the line on intelligence operations? I think William Colby is probably the hero of that kind of blew the horn, even though a lot of people in the intelligence agency don't really like Colby because of what he did. They did kind of, one other effect that he had to saying some of those things was the people that were overseas in operations are at risk now because you're exposing some elements of what the CIA is up to, which is a real danger. And I agree that you don't have those people in danger. You shouldn't do something like that. But what they label national security, I wish they would clarify more on.
One of the things that you're referring to was back in the 70s, a good amount of that spying on Americans was more political than espionage. It was anti war protesters.
Yeah.
The CIA shouldn't have been doing anything in the States anyway. In their charter, they're not allowed to be doing things in the US. They're violating their own charter to be doing that. And the FBI, who had once been so big on going after gangs and the mob and all that stuff, were turning around going after anybody that wasn't the Republican law and order Nixon guy. So it was a very political sort of.
And Hoover never acknowledged the mob. Can you believe that?
Well, Hoover was.
He was doing a little stuff on the side. Yeah, he's doing a little something on the side. What's interesting is I know there's rumors about Hoover and his whole relationship with Clyde Tolson. I can't verify that, and I had called it. I have the photo. I've seen the photo, so I don't. I still can't verify it. But what I did find in the archives is Clyde Tolson's employee record, and it's like a performance review thing. And out of 50 years or however long Hoover was director, Clyde Tolson is the only one to get an excellent 100% everything on his whole performance review signed with Hoover at the bottom. And then you can take this out of, like, you can take it and run with it, but it says in the document, very attentive to my needs. I don't know what that means. But if you're going with the conspiracy, you can run with that one, man. But I think that it's a little aside, but I think that's pretty interesting because, I mean, you look into what Hoover was doing, COINTELPRO, invading the movie screens with his FBI, looking for communists, doing all this type of stuff. It just makes it like, oh God, he's hypocritical a little bit. But, I mean, that's what you get when you're in a position like FBI director. You got blackmail, wiretaps, you got all that stuff. I'm like, there's no way it ends up good. You have to turn bad at some point.
Plus, he bullied Hollywood a lot. He wanted his FBI agents to be public relations I don't know what the word would be, but he would appear in movies like Pickup on South Street or whatever. I've forgotten. No, that wasn't the one. But his agents weren't allowed to even be seen drinking coffee because they were supermen who were out there going after the gangsters and the criminals. And always was looking for a way to get that propaganda bounce and the publicity boost. He was an interesting character in American history. And if it wasn't for the war stuff, the anti-war activities, and really the Nixon thing, a lot of times, by the way, people blame the CIA for stuff that the CIA didn't want to do. The big example of that is the Salvador Allende assassination. CIA didn't do it; they facilitated it, but only because Nixon and Kissinger put their thumb on the thing. Get him out of here. So they cooperated. So a lot of time you got to draw your finger to whoever the president is at the time, and well, like Reagan, good God Almighty, he was big on using clandestine services to um, meet his own ends, his own political agenda.
Well, it's effective. It's an effective use. The CIA and the FBI are very good at what they do, whatever the whatever that is. But they are good. Like covert action type things are really interesting. I think the only big failure that they have was with the Castro one. But that one was so to me, like that's fascinating. It was very meticulous the way that they tried to kill Castro. I think Fabian Escalante, his advisor, said 634 attempts, but they did the plausible deniability act, which was trying to use the mob, which to me is just like, I got so angry when I found that out because throughout every movie, the villain or outlaw is always the mafia guy or the bootlegger or anything like that. And the CIA is always the good guy. Like, we got to clean up the streets. And then you find out it's like they influence the movies. You're like, you guys are working together. What are we
You
talking
know, we
about
work
here?
hand in glove, big time. I just saw a presentation at the International Spy Museum, I guess it was last week, about how the mob helped out in World War II, doing a whole lot of missions because they could get places that, well, there was no FBI or
Was that Lucky
CIA.
Luciano?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
he was part of that. Yes, because they could get into the dock workers and go into places where the mafia was, and there was no law enforcement there. So, well, okay, let's cooperate with the mob to get to the spies that we want because we're all about getting German saboteurs from blowing up ships. So we'll cooperate with anybody. And yeah, that's what kept Kennedy. Well, they got pissed off at Kennedy because they helped him get elected, and then he turned around and sticked Robert Kennedy on them. And so that's a big part of that theory that they were behind his assassination.
There's a lot of interesting things. I don't think that's enough motive. What is interesting to me is Alan Dulles, guy who was fired by Kennedy. I think this is in Oliver Stone's new film as well too. He was fired by Kennedy, and then they found him on a CIA farm, like one of those bases, or whatever. He was fired. He's not director anymore, but I guess he's so connected in there. He had been there forever. I mean, back
And his brother, yeah.
yeah, him and John Foster Dulles. But he's the one that gets appointed to the Warren Commission to investigate the president's death, which is like you just had the Fox investigate the chicken coop. The dude got fired by Kennedy. You think he's going to be happy about that? But the interesting part, when Kennedy was doing his speeches against Nixon, Alan Dulles wrote those speeches. He talked to the guy that was doing the speeches for Kennedy, and he helped influence some of those speeches. He was actually on Kennedy's side, which is the complete opposite of when you hear anybody talk about Dulles. There's like this bitter rivalry and hatred. But when Kennedy gets elected, he gets Allen Dulles and Hoover on his side. And there's like a lot of people are like kind of angry, not angry, but they're kind of back and forth on it because like, why would he do this if he hated those guys? You know what I mean? Well, I mean, you got to think, how long was Hoover the FBI director? How long was Allen Dulles the CIA director? It's better to get the whole agency on board if you can get their boss on board. You know what I mean? And the respect for Hoover was, I mean, the number of articles I've read about Hoover's Hoover's FBI's loyalty to him, even at times dismissing the whole Clyde Tolson thing until there was more towards his death. There was a recent newspaper article that talked about, they were like, wait, he lied to us. That's after photos surfaced. I don't know if it was the mob or something like that, but I just think that's interesting that there was this Kennedy knew, like, hey, to get the CIA and the FBI on board, I just talked to their directors and pulled them onto my side. And then eventually, after a little while, they got a points of contention and someone got fired. Sorry, I'm into the whole Kennedy thing. I want to draw examples sometimes of that.
Right ahead, why not?
Well, it just makes it interesting. I mean, when it comes to domestic surveillance, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I think I have some balanced perspective on it, but I'm just curious how you think about.
Well, I guess a balanced perspective is probably a good way to put it because there's all those phrases, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance and all that. And I forget, I think it was Tom Clancy again. He was saying something about you're going to have to give up some privacy if you want to have security. Because I know of neighborhoods and places where they don't want all of those street cameras. Uh, why not? Well, you might catch you doing something. Um, to a large extent, I don't really worry about an awful lot, but then again, I don't have anything to worry about. I live such a bland and boring life that
What are you talking
nobody's
about?
going
You're right
to
about spies. They got everything to worry about with you. You're gonna be like, what is this guy uncovering about me?
be. Well, except I focus on most of the fictional realm of things. Mostly movies and books, and
Have you ever
well,
come
I get
have you ever come across anything through a fictional way that has maybe some realistic things about it? Like there's a lot of stuff, like a heart attack gun. That's in the church committee. They show it, and the guy looks down the barrel of it, and I'm like, don't look down it. But that's real, and I'm like, that's out of a movie.
Oh my goodness, there's examples of that all over the place. One fun story that I guess most Bond people know is in Thunderball. There's a scene where James Bond is tossed into a shark pool,
Well,
and he has this little device he puts in his mouth. He can breathe underwater for 5 minutes. And almost immediately, the producers of Mission Impossible come a calling, can we do that? How does that work? It's just a prop. It doesn't work. Um, there's a lot of the Hollywood go on, they would watch Mission Impossible one night and go, can we do that? Put the guys out on their check out their technology. You really want to get into that side of things. There's a new book, um, Catherine Arnett, the science in the James Bond movies. I think I forgot the exact title, and I just interviewed her. But she goes through all of the uses of science and how they is it possible? Is it doable? Could this happen? Could that happen? And what's reasonable? What's not reasonable? And it's a really, really good book.
well, they say art imitates life, but then also at the same time, does life imitate art? I mean, half the time I'm watching like a spy movie and I look through like some documentation on stuff, and like a lot of this stuff seems like right out of a movie, but either the CIA or FBI does it first or they get it off the movies.
It goes back for like The Enemy of the State, a film I mentioned earlier, which I think is one of the 10 best spy movies ever made. I was talking with an actress who was in it because her father was head of the NSA for a while. And she said, you watched that movie back then and it was kind of like sci-fi. You watch it now, it's like watching the headlines. The thing that would happen, then is how we operate today, especially the surveillance culture and how everything is so AI oriented and computer oriented. Back in the day, when you think about the 60s, we were all big about all those gadgets and all of that. These days, nobody cares because everybody's got all their gadgets. Your cell phone, can do a hell of a lot more than half the stuff that the man from Uncle carried around with him. Uh,
Well, there's certain things like domestic surveillance that I think now at this point it's not as bad as it was back in the day, only because we've accepted every device in our pocket is probably listening to us. I mean, advertisers do it all the time, so that's not as bad. I hope they're just not doing things like MK Ultra right now. That would be freaking nuts. I'm sure it's got to be happening somewhere in the world, but I don't know.
oh, I'm sure it's happening all over the world. I'm just not so sure here in, you know,
In your
central
state, maybe,
Pennsylvania that,
yeah,
yeah, that,
maybe my state.
I mean, in DC, very likely, but, well, I think more it's between the two political parties than it is any intelligence agencies. Or like lately, I've had a lot of friends talking about that congressman from was it New York who lied about everything. How come he wasn't
Take
vetted?
your pick, man. Take your pick.
It's just how is it? Usually, I mean, I've been involved in party politics for a long time. Usually, oppositional research is name of the game. That guy's running for that. Let's find out everything we can about him. Can we find any dirt, preferably? And all of this stuff from Santos, and nobody knew anything. That's weird.
Well, I mean, what do you think about like the Trump Mar-a-Lago stuff and then Biden with the same thing with some documentation in his garage?
My bottom line thought on that is that we overclassify stuff. I'm willing to bet you don't know what any of those documents are, but I'm willing to bet that 97% of that information, big woo.
I get mean, it's something you come across when you're looking through old documentations is destroy when no longer needed. And they have a routine destroying process, which kind of sucks because there's a lot of stuff that they destroyed that we probably will never could be great historical value that's gone. Clay Shaw's documents in the JFK assassination was one, but Garrison happened to steal those, and somehow it landed in Clay Shaw friends' basements. And a guy I had from the ARRB found it and read through them, and then gave it to the National Archives. So now they're reserved in there. But those were things like the people are like, oh, he was not guilty, just destroy the documentation. I'm like, hang on a second, you don't know about 60 years from now, this is going to be a highly controversial event.
Well, of course you can't. Well, that's the one thing. When they do declassify documents, that's still declassifying stuff from World War II for crying out loud. All those people are dead. All those issues, long unimportant. They're still declassifying stuff about the Kennedy assassination.
We still
What was
don't know
that?
what's going on in Mexico. That's the one thing about Mexico. It's a place where spies meet. So it's not just our spies, it's spies from every other country. And Mexico was that's why it was interesting when you mentioned Mexico propaganda. I was like, when did that start? Because I don't know when they started with the Mexico and spy operations, but they had plenty of
Oh,
intelligence
probably
operations.
forever because Mexico had big connections with Germany.
Ooh.
So there was a lot of back and forth between
Well,
German.
JM Wave was out there in Operation Amlash. That cat scared me. I'm sorry.
That startled me too. Threw me off. What were we talking about?
Amlash and JM Wave was in Mexico City.
Got
In
me
the
on those two. I don't remember them off the top of my head.
There's stuff that happened around more around in the 60s. There's spy covert operational bases and stuff like that. But it's interesting to look through like old documentation and see that. What do you think about the conspiracy term creation of that word in the document 1035 960 and it's linked to the Kennedy assassination? It's when they first coined the term conspiracy theorist. It was anybody that was critics against the Warren Commission. And this is where people say it was created during the Kennedy assassination. Anybody that was going against the official statement of the Warren Commission, that news outlets were going to label them conspiracy theorists.
Because I hadn't heard that one before. I got a little dog leaping around distracting me. Sorry about that.
You're good. But I think that's interesting stuff because at the bottom of that document, and we have it preserved in the archives, it just says destroy when no longer needed. Where I'm like, bro, I mean, the amount of thing, and I get it. Everything back then was a fear of communism, especially in the 60s and 70s. That justified anything you wanted to do. I mean, real domestic surveillance where it's needed is when you had issues like the Weather Underground. They might not have been trying to hurt people, but they were blowing up stuff to make messages to people, and someone could have accidentally got hurt. That's real domestic terrorism.
Now, them, I forget who else, but yeah, the ones that were the most famous, I suppose. Well, yeah, anything against the communists, especially the 50s. Good God Almighty. I've talked with actors who are blacklisted for no good reason. The fear of communism was just so insane that,
Wait, you actually spoke with someone who was on the blacklist?
yes,
Can you
her
tell
name,
who was it?
her name was Marcia Hunt. She went to D.C. with the Bogarts, Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, when they went to complain to Congress about the treatment of Hollywood. And they came back, a lot of the actors, including Bogart and Bacall, recanted, saying, "Oh well, we shouldn't have done that." Marcia Hunt never did and paid for it. There's a lot of actors who just lost their careers really because they refused to testify to Congress.
What that blacklist? How long did that last for?
Not that long. I think that was like basically 4 years up until the time that McCarthy was discredited. Um, well, Hollywood has always had these periods of purges, and we're going to take this position, and we can do this. Because remember, for example, in the early 1940s, Russia was our friend, and there's a lot of films in which the Russian beauty was the princess of the film and all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, you had the flip. The Russians were our enemies, and all of a sudden, all these people who'd made all these World War II films propping up the Russians were now suspect of being pro-commie because they had done this stuff back in World War II. Now they're under suspicion for what was once what Congress wanted them to do. So it goes back and forth.
Did you ever think like when it came to the threat of communism? Like, I mean, I'm not calling you old or anything. I don't know when you were born, but when it comes to the threat of communism, I mean, was a lot of that very believable? I mean, the amount of propaganda I've read about, it's just it. At that point, I'm trying to put myself in the mindset of someone that would be growing up in the 50s and the 60s, and it's just like, I mean, what do you know? I mean, you think at that point, I think today is like the peak time where government um oversight is like in effect. People really don't trust their government anymore. But back then there was no reason not to.
No reason not to. And of course, the big dividing lines between the right and the left was real big. Um, I interviewed one time ago Matt Savetic. He was the son of the guy who was I was a communist for the no, I led three lives. Well, that was Herbert Philbrick. See, my head's bouncing around here. But they had these spies that they would put into labor unions for the most part. Because if you were pro labor, you were commie. And like Pete Seeger and all of those guys, that was what communism was almost defined as. You supported the workers. You were anti-corporate. If you didn't support corporate greed, you were a commie. That was a big part of it because there wasn't an awful lot of. Well, they talked a lot about all these communist cells that they're about to take over America. Absolutely nothing ever came of that. And
I got a perfect question for you, but tell me about Walt Disney. I know that I've read all of his letters back and forth to J. Edgar Hoover, and it starts off really easy, like very simple. And it's light propaganda. I accept it, which is like, hey, Mr. Hoover, we're going to have the FBI on screen with our Mickey Mouse characters so the kids can, want to grow up to be the FBI. Look, that's fine. Yeah, but that's fine. But then you got towards the ending, like 900 pages in on the FBI's website when they're all doing all these parts. You get through the last document. And this is like months and months after talking back and forth. And he's like, we have a bunch of communists that are striking up labor unions. And they were just like, do whatever you want with them. And it was like, what are you doing, Walt Disney? You make great movies. And now there's people that are striking up labor unions against you.
he was not alone in that. There were quite a few folks in the entertainment business who, yeah, if you support the labor unions, you were anti-American, you were un-American. Decent wages, oh screw that. If you were pro women's rights, you were communist. Um, yeah, that was almost a whole century long of that stuff. And I think there are folks today who still feel that way. Um,
Did people accept it back then? Like, did most people accept when someone was pro women or pro labor or pro any of this type of stuff or did they just kind of maybe accept it in public and then behind closed doors, they kind of were like, I don't think that's right.
yeah, that would run the range. Those who are genuine supporters, who are workers out there, and then there are those, like you say, who kind of, publicly doing this and then behind closed doors, acting a different way. I can't think of all the names, but every possible position you could think of, somebody was taking.
Did you ever look into any of those like new MK Ultra films that came out? I know a recent one just came out.
No, I don't even know what that is.
MK Ultra?
Yeah.
Oh man. How do you not know that? That's a big historical thing, dude. That's like big. Oh, well, that's not as big as the Vietnam War, but it's big. It's pretty big. Drugging LSD with
Oh
Americans.
my
Yeah.
goodness, yes, I had to flip gears. Yes,
I
okay, never mind.
was like, bro, that's a really big historical one. But it led to the Frank Olson documentary that's on Wormwood. Frank Olson was the guy I was mentioned in the church committee report that fell out of an 8-story window. High on
I don't
LSD.
know why I had a brain fart there, but that's what I was having.
At least you know it now, though. Um,
Yeah, yeah, I
uh,
remember.
but have you seen any work into that? The new MK Ultra movie or anyone's in the past?
Uh, hasn't crossed my desk, but then again, as you can tell as this conversation goes, there's just so many avenues and passages and alleyways and everything. You can't be a master of them all and be aware of everything.
I know. I'm surprised. I'm usually diving down this subject. Your mind, you end up going crazy. Like I felt like I fell down the rabbit hole a couple of times, and at this point, I'm in the alleyway begging for change.
Yeah, because I know folks, who spent their entire careers in Europe, going back and forth between Germany and Italy. So you don't really want to talk to them about the Middle East. And then I know folks who, that's what they spent their careers were in either Afghanistan or Iraq or anything. They've got a very specialized slice of the pie. And so you want to talk to them about that. They're not going to say much about Mexico or Brazil or Spain or Portugal.
What gets me is the number of people that probably took secrets to the grave. I mean, we're lucky with like Howard Hunt, where he gave that interview, deathbed confession to his son, one of the Watergate burglars. You know, that's a very I mean, he's talking about the CIA's mindset or the FBI's mindset. He's talking about oh yeah, we had ideas of slathering LSD on someone's driver's steering wheel and hoping they'd steer into. You're just like, what is this guy talking about, dude? Like that's straight out of a movie. But that's like the mindset that eventually, I mean, if you can think that some of them are thinking like that, then a lot of them are probably thinking like that. Like, no wonder there's so many operations that go on. I bet you can spend hundreds and hundreds of years trying to
Well, I
understand it
remember
all.
Howard Hunt wrote a lot of spy novels. That was kind of his bread and butter, was coming up with all kinds of twists and turns for the espionage game.
You have
He
to
was pretty
think
good, actually.
some of that's propaganda. You have to think that like some of that's like to throw off the Russians or something.
Yeah, he was fun to read. It kind of surprised me because I'm no fan of the plumbers, but you got to give the devil his due, and he's got some due coming, and he could write.
What did you think about like Nixon and Hoover's relationship when Nixon tried to get Hoover to start his own FBI, or tried to get the FBI to help him out, and the FBI said no, and then so he tried to start his own. Imagine if we had a whole other Secret Service organization if that would have panned out.
Oh, you mean like Ronald Reagan?
Ronald Reagan did abuse it, but I'm a little bit unfamiliar with how bad he abused it.
It was, well, the whole Contra thing. And oh yeah, he had his own secret force. Um, Nixon and Hoover. Well, Nixon would use every dirty. Well, he's Trump. Use every dirty trick in the book to preserve power. In his case, it was that anti-war thing that really tore him down. He'd have just accepted the fact that there's going to be dissent in America, he wouldn't have got himself into the hole that he did. That was his whole thing. Really out to go for the American people to do anything. It's all about preserving power.
Yeah. I mean, do you think Hoover, like when it comes to Hoover, did you think he was a good FBI director? I mean, he lasted a very long time.
I'd say a mixed bag. I would say his better years were his early years because he, built the FBI from nothing. Just a little small office in the basement somewhere. I forget what they called it, the Office of Information something. And then he built it into the 30s and the 40s. Uh, they were supreme. They were excellent. They did good work. They fought crime. It's when he got political that everything went downhill.
And the FBI production code office, even when looking over movie scripts and things of that sort. I mean, when you watch a film from the past that happens to do with an agent or something, do you ever just try and look up the realistic way that maybe that might have panned out if there's any documentation on it, like what they might have added, I mean, they had a rule. The bad guys can shoot as much as they want, but they have to miss. Now, I don't know about you, but
That's right.
every time I watch an FBI film, I always thought when I was a kid, oh my God, the badasses are on screen. And then I find out that fact like 20 something years later. And I'm like, I've been lied to my whole life. It's been a lie.
Oh yeah, for a lot of those films, the FBI was on the set, literally calling the shots. Do this, don't do that. Have the heroes do this. Have the heroes act like that. Like Pickup on South Street, I think it was Mo and lead guy whose name I've forgotten. Had to be portrayed certain ways. They had to be all American people. They can't be, oh, she was a slut. That's the thing. She was a prostitute. She got to be a good slut. There's just
They call them massage therapists.
okay. That was, down under luck kind of girl. Oh no, you got to be careful.
I
You got to hold
wonder
up wholesome American values.
I wonder if they found like eventually they had to find actors or people that had a clean record that they would just display them as FBI agents throughout movies. I wonder if they ever told them like, "Hey, don't ever party, don't ever we're going to give you enough salary to never do anything bad because we need you. You're clean." And not everyone in Hollywood's clean. Or they covered up scandals.
Oh, they covered up scandals, but that was Hollywood more protecting itself from the public, that because the public was wanting holier than thou idols, to hang on their dashboards or whatever. Oh yeah, that had nothing to do with espionage or any of that. That was just business. And then the Hays Code there for a long time, what they could put into movies. Big controversy. Alfred Hitchcock had Ingrid Bergman and Cary Grant kissing each other for, I think it was 36 seconds in Notorious. Well, that was a big scandal.
That's a long
Um,
kiss.
yeah, it's very famous for that. Yeah, but
Why was that a scandal? Just because it was long?
Yeah. Oh, on-screen kissing was bad, I mean, oh, these were the ages when no, this was before TV, but they did a lot of effort to tone down sexuality.
Yeah,
The
they
point,
used to have things where they would cut to the fireplace or cut to a window pane with rain on it, and that's how you knew that they were getting freaky.
yes,
My favorite's when they see a train entering a tunnel, like
yes,
right when
that's a
they're
Hitchcock film, yeah, especially at the end. Yeah.
you just kind of leave it up to your imagination as an audience viewer. But they had rules. You had to keep one foot on the ground. Like, I
Oh,
mean, look,
that's mostly TV. Yeah, even married couples had to sleep in separate beds. Whatever
oh
sense
God.
that makes.
I mean, but in reality, like, I mean, come on, everyone watches porn and everyone does things like that. It's just to me, it's just like, why not show it? I mean, now it's like the blandest thing you can do is someone shows their boobs or something. I mean, there's crazy stuff now where even I'm like, good God,
Well, our
what's going
culture now and our culture then are not remotely anything alike that I can think of. It's just completely different. Everything's open. There's nothing secret. There's yeah, it's just wide open, no censorship whatsoever that I can see. And I don't really worry about it too much because me, entertainment's entertainment. If you take it too seriously, you got a problem.
Yeah, I mean, you can always just change the channel as well too. I would get mad though if I saw Hoover as like a Boy Scout and they were like pitching him to be like this great person. I'm like, nah, come on, let show him some flaws a little bit. Give him a mustache or something.
Well, they wouldn't do that back then.
Well, it's even like we have propaganda that goes a different way now. We had that. You ever see the movie Jojo the Rabbit? The kid's in Germany. He's, dealing with the middle of the Holocaust situation, and his imaginary friend is Adolf Hitler. And I'm like, how the hell did this get on TV? Even I'm watching, I'm like, oh my God, and it pitches it like a kid show. It's Hitler and him dancing and skipping through the
Oh Lord,
forest.
no, I had not heard of that. That
And then
is
he walks
actually
outside and the
repulsive.
and the mom is hung outside and the kid's crying and they never show the mom. They just show her feet dangling. And I'm like, oh, I had to tell my nephews, like, we gotta change the channel. I thought this was a kid show. I didn't know it was gonna be this awful.
That does sound god awful.
But it went the complete opposite way. Instead of, killing Nazis like the movie Inglorious Bastards, it went the complete opposite way where the damn kid has an imaginary friend and it's Adolf Hitler.
Well, that's twisted. No, I missed that one.
You gotta watch it.
Again, I
I'd
miss
love to get your
90% of
reaction.
popular culture because I love, like I used to love late night TV talk shows. Now they get on, and after the monologue, I don't know who the hell they're talking to.
What late night talk show are you talking about?
Stephen Colbert and
Don't
Tonight
don't watch.
Show.
That's all garbage. That's all garbage. I watched little
Well,
scenes of it.
I like the well, if it's somebody he's talking to that I know who he's talking to, which happens rare and rare and rare, like maybe Carly Simon or Tom Hanks or something. I'll recognize them. I'll know their work. That's what I'm interested in is their work. I don't really give a rat's ass about people's private lives and who's sleeping with who and all that. Completely uninteresting to me. I want to know about the movie they're making, the album they're making, the tour that they're on. That's what my head's at.
You would hate my show because my show is just nothing but back and forth banter between people. But I think it leads to interesting conversation. There's like a really good show out there that I like is Norm Macdonald. When he was making a show, it's Super Dave Osborne. I don't know if you know who that guy is. Very
Oh,
good.
wait a minute. Super Dave. Yes, I remember him. He wasn't Norm MacDonald. That was a guy on
No, no, no.
Saturday Night Live.
I'll send you the link to it. It's the first episode on Norm Macdonald's show, and it's Super Dave Osborne. And Super Dave's like best thing is like he gets angry when people are cutting him off, interrupting him. So throughout the whole show, they just were doing it on purpose. And he would say things like, "Oh, I swear to God, I'm gonna come over there and rip your head off." And it's just random, but that's like the best interview style. And it's just like his jokes are hilarious. It's just back and forth stories, and that's like I like it when you feel like you're not actually being recorded. You're not in the talk show type thing. I mean, there's not a lot of TV that does that now. Most stuff feels like it's a propaganda message or some crap.
A lot of it I miss completely. I can think there's a million shows out there I have never seen, probably never will. Don't watch any sitcoms at all. Hell, my favorite show is Canadian. So
I mean, well, I mean, that's with politics, though. I mean, back in the day, I mean, they might have played propaganda stuff and certain patriotic messages, but was it as political as it was today? I mean, when it compares to now, you can't even change the channel without running into politics.
It's been that way as long as I could remember.
So just TV's
It was
dead.
really, really intense in the 60s when it was the dividing line was hawks and doves, pro Vietnam, anti Vietnam, pro civil rights, anti civil rights. Um, and then as the 70s kicked in, it was all about women's liberation, pro women's lib, anti women's lib. There's always been those dividing lines.
Now we bringing it back a little bit to we were talking about the anti-war activists during the 70s and a little bit of the 60s as well too. I mean, did you ever when you were like learning about that or were you hearing about it, did you ever think that like look into any of those movements to see what they actually were? Or did you just buy what was getting written on the newspaper?
Well, I was part of it.
Is that a dog?
Yes,
Okay.
that's Joey.
He jumped up there quick. Thought it was a cat.
Yeah, he does. He bounds around. Yeah. Oh yeah, I was, a part of it back when I was going to college. In high school too, we had the Harrisburg Seven was a big trial. What was that, 72? Philip Berrigan and this Catholic priest who were, the FBI was after them for going to blow up the Pentagon. No, heating tunnels in the Pentagon and kidnap Henry Kissinger and all kinds of stuff that in the end they couldn't prove. The best they could do was prove that Berrigan and his nun lover in her prison smuggled love letters back and forth. Well, that was a bust, but big thing here because we had all these celebrities coming to Harrisburg. When I was going to school, yeah, I went to all kinds of different events. The only communists I ever knew were vets.
Really?
Uh, yeah, yeah, they turned commie in the jungles. Read the little red book by Mao Zedong. And back in those, I mean, you couldn't avoid the war; it was just everywhere. Your neighbors down the street that you grew up with dying in the jungles. So people tended to take. I've got very, very heated about it. My dad was one, and the Republicans, all of hippies, blah,
My grandpa was one. He had an undying loyalty to Coca-Cola.
who?
My grandpa, he was a Vietnam vet, and he had a undying loyalty to Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola.
You probably know why, right? Because they
Yeah,
funded
I
the
did.
war
As soon as you
movement.
said that, I had to process it for
Yeah.
a second.
I always asked. I was like, if he caught me drinking a Pepsi around him, he would slap the hell out of me and slap it out of my hand. He was like, "No, we don't do that. We don't do that here. This is a Coke family." I'm like, "What does that even mean?" And they funded the war effort, which I didn't know about, but I learned.
That's a little bit like these days. I guess supporting that My Pillow guy and
He's a
big
big
Trump.
trumper. All right. So that was on Jimmy Fallon. Did you see Fallon when he was on there?
No,
They put him in a claw machine as like a joke. No, it's Jimmy Kimmel. Wait, I don't know. There's so many of those damn shows. I can't keep track of all. There's like 50 Jimmys and one Stewart. Um, no, but they had him in a claw machine, the My Pillow guy, and a kid would come up and he's trying to talk to him about, yeah, he goes, all these machines are rigged just like the election, and they were joking around with them and doing that whole type thing. And then the kid went to go put in a quarter and try and use the claw machine, and the claw's like banging into his head. He starts screaming at the kid. That's hilarious. Like I know he's playing with it, but then he said something in it. He was like, Jimmy, you brought me on here so you can make fun of me. So let me just say one thing. And it was like, okay, that was like behind the scenes type stuff. Like that should have got cut, where they would have been like, oh, he's part of the joke. But he was like, look, you brought me here. I know you're making fun of me. So let me just say what I want to say. And then you can let me go. And I think that was interesting. But that's TV now where reality is so real, people don't believe.
it's hard to know because I live with a very Republican wife and I'm a very Democrat guy.
How does that work?
And well, that makes for uneasy TV watching at night because
You
love
stick
conquers all. It really does.
do you stick to the channels that just sell music like a Michael Jackson CD or Bobby Best
No,
of
I'm too
Bobby
much a
Brown?
news junkie. I spend too much time with all the various news channels because most of the entertainment stuff I just don't care. I'm just not interested. Well, we sure went a long way around to get to these places, didn't we?
Yeah. There's A lot of outlets and avenues going around, but I like to watch some TV. I haven't watched a whole lot of it recently. I mean, mostly of it takes off the streaming services now, which I'm happy because they put a lot of documentaries up there. I think they have a couple good ones on the Cold War, which I think is pretty interesting.
I've been seeing an awful lot about Hitler on, oh, I don't know what channels they are, the History Channel and the ones right about that. Um, I'm still mesmerized by that monster. The monsters keep coming back. They keep coming back. Different guys.
Yep. There's always important, obviously, things about the intelligence services, especially when it comes to wars like that, where you're fighting someone like Hitler or someone that's literally the essence of evil, or you need operations and strategies out there. That's when you want all those assassination attempts on Castro. I mean, I don't justify any of them, but you want that creative thinking of poison pills and a skin diving suit that's laced with some type of fish shell toxin that's just nuts. At that point, I'm like, look, and there's a couple of them, like working with the mob. Giancana had tossed out the idea of poison pills, where I'm like, that's a good, smart strategy. But you're telling me an exploding seashell is not a mob hit? That is a CIA thought. And that is a damn. I wonder if they ever delivered that. Like, how did they plan to do it? But you never know.
You never know, is right. But like I said, that those attempts just didn't work. I can remember a debate they used to have. I haven't heard in a long time. Is if you had the chance to kill Hitler, would you? Or are you too moral to shoot Hitler?
I've seen plenty of films that have joked about shooting Hitler out a window when they're time traveling or something like that. Uh, But there's always that it's the crib, which you go back in time and kill baby Hitler. And actually, that's a justification in one of the JFK, the new 22 release, or yeah, 22 release or 23 release. Oh, no, it was released in December 22. The newest one. There's a document in there, and it's Scott Beckenridge talking to Blakey from the House Select Committee on Assassinations. And they were talking about justifying actions that are covert, killing somebody overseas. And he goes, let me put this to you. It's a hypothetical. And this is what the document states. I mean, almost word for word. If you could go back in time and kill baby Hitler. And they said that. And I'm like, that's something out of a movie. I've seen that in movies. It's in the Avengers. When the new one where he talks about going back in time and strangling baby Thanos. But this document, he states that. And, he's trying to justify some of the actions that the CIA did, which I thought was just really interesting, where it was like, damn, that's like a Hollywood excuse that you just tossed out. And this is an official government document with the damn presidential seal on it and everything.
Oh, that question's been around forever. And I can remember is the whole question of could you murder someone? Could you murder Hitler? That's a kind of a question to challenge
Ask
your
me
own
after I'm
morals.
driving. Ask me after I'm driving.
And what's the driving got to do with it?
Telling you, there's nothing about being in a car and driving that just gets you angry for no apparent reason.
That's for true. That's one thing I've noticed about America. As soon as they get behind the wheel, everybody else in the country turns into a complete idiot.
Everyone's an asshole at that point. I can tell you that much. You don't got a blinker on. We're exchanging words. But that is, I mean, I think everyone, that's a moral question. That's weird how that's a safe topic to talk about if you would go back in time and kill Hitler. Like, I guess it's just because he's been demonized so much in society. And I don't justify anything, obviously, he did. But it's just weird how it's still a human person. You know what I mean? It's that moral question. It's like it's still
It's
killing
that whole
somebody.
question, yeah.
Even with the number of people when we talk about with war killing the enemy. That's how they viewed it. I mean, they didn't view it anything else. It wasn't a person anymore.
Now, would you go back and kill Putin?
He killed more people than Hitler did.
Putin, there's Stalin, there's Lenin, there's Hitler, there's
Oh, it's Stalin, not Putin. Whoops. I almost got that historical fact wrong. Yeah, there's plenty of people though, but that's like, what about Unit 731? Nobody ever talks about Unit 731. Do you even know who Unit 731 is?
what do you want people to do?
I want them to talk about it. Unit 731 is a biological weapons or biological team in Japan that was way worse than the Nazis. They used to vivisection people, cut them from the bottom up, and watch them bleed. They used to do horrible experimentation. But then we only talk about the Nazis. And I'm like, it's kind of like when everyone always talks about Brad Pitt as being handsome. There's plenty of handsome actors in Hollywood. Ryan Reynolds is handsome. Now I've made the show awkward.
Not really, because I haven't seen an actor in decades.
What's the last movie you watched? You've seen the
I
James Bond stuff, so that's what do you mean
well,
decades?
I kind of measure my going blindness by Bond movies. The last one I saw in the theater that I could comprehend anything was The Spy Who Loved Me. And even then, it was getting washed out. The last one that I could sit up close to the TV and see what was going on was Tomorrow Never Dies. That was the end of that.
Right, so you are really blind? I thought you were messing with me.
No, no, no. I've got retinitis pigmentosa. Yeah,
How
I was
how'd you get
blind
on
for
the
all the.
Zoom call?
Sorry,
How'd you get on the Zoom call if you're blind?
I hit the link you sent.
But how'd you see it?
I didn't. Well, I have a computer that's got speech software called JAWS,
Oh,
and it reads everything. That's how I write books. That's how I set up interviews. That's how I write stuff for the website. That's how I do all kinds of stuff. I email freaking all day long.
I didn't know about that. I didn't know there's a program for that.
Oh yeah, oh, yeah.
Technology's getting advanced, I could tell you that much.
Changed a lot when I first started going to grad school. That wasn't any of this stuff. And then slowly we started getting, desktops, and slowly speech software started to kick in and improve. And now it's just plain indispensable.
Yep, you literally got a giant, massive supercomputer in the size of your cell phone in your pocket. They need to stop making them so big though, because they're getting hard to fit in jeans. Very true. But no, Wesley, I appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show, man. Seriously, I really did enjoy this conversation. I know I told you I don't do scripts or anything, but you gave me a lot, man. I appreciate the chat. Would you like to promote again where people can find your links?
Oh, of course, yeah. Uh, the spy stuff, the big one is Spywise Secret Dossier. That's SPYWISE SECRETDOISSIER.com. Go to Amazon and you can find links to all of the books, the spy books, the science fiction books. I have a sci-fi website too, the Beta Earth Chronicles. I have Facebook. You can find me on Facebook easy enough. Um, I'm really easy to find. Just Google Dr. Wesley Britton and stuff will pop up.
Well, I'm going to link all your links in the description. And like I said,
Oh, please, yeah.
it's been a pleasure chatting with you. And thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast.